heard the conventional view. Now prepare yourself to hear the other side. High school teachers Mike Margison and Justin Spears bring you the alternative view you didn't get in the classroom. Now here they are, Margison, and Spears.
Hey, good Sunday evening. If you're listening live on YouTube, thank you for being a part of the live listening audience. We are recording this on a Sunday, beautiful, beautiful Sunday evening here in West Central Indiana. As a matter of fact, as I record this, I'm looking out the balcony of my second story of my house, and just an absolutely gorgeous sunset in progress right now. Had a wonderful weekend. Tired though, ready to kind of rest up here for the rest of the evening and recharge for the coming week. So welcome to the other side. I am Justin Spears, joined as always with Mr. Mike Margison. Mike, what is going on this evening, man?
Not much. Happy Sunday to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a really crazy, hectic summer, kind of hitting the dog days here a little bit, coming down the home stretch. We got a couple weeks before we as public high school teachers will fire back up in the classroom, and that's kind of got us geared up a little bit here, thinking a lot, if you've been following along with the episodes here recently, towards schooling topics, and that's what we're certainly going to be covering tonight. Before we jump into that, though, just real quickly, as always, we want to go through all of the contact and listening options. So if you are listening out there on our YouTube page, again, we appreciate that. You can find us on YouTube by searching The Other Side Podcast. Mike Justin is the name of the page there. You'll be able to find all of our back episodes cataloged on there. If you're listening here in West Central Indiana, we are broadcast on WCVL on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m., WCVLAM.com, 1550 92.1 in West Central Indiana, Crawfordsville to be exact. As we always say, thanks to those guys out there for their support. If you'd like to listen to the show on demand, right, where you can get this on any number of podcast theaters, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play Podcasts. You can find us on the Spreaker Radio app that's available for iPhone or Android. Again, you can search The Other Side with Margison and Spears. You'll have to search that whole search string there, The Other Side with Margison and Spears. You can find the show, subscribe to us there as well. And last but certainly not least, we are a part of the Cerberus Radio Network, and that is a fantastic network of online radio programming with Suzanne Sherman, Mark Kreslins, Dan Bailey, Jeff Johnson. You can get the Schiff Gold Report. You can get Mike Maharrey from the 10th Amendment Center's podcast on there as well. So just lots of great programming over there. That's the Cerberus Radio Network. You can get them on YouTube, Cerberus Radio Network, or through Radio Co., which is an online internet radio programming channel. Radio Co., search for Cerberus Radio Network. So those are all the different ways that you can listen to our show. If you'd like to contact us individually, you can get me on Facebook, facebook.com /Justin Spears 4. Mike and I are both on Twitter. He's at Mr. Margison. I'm at Justin Spears 4. The radio show itself, podcast itself, The Other Side, we have a page at TOS_podcast. You can get us on Facebook and Twitter with those. So having gotten all of that out of the way, let's transition into talking about why we're here this evening. As I said a little bit ago, one of the themes that you've probably heard if you've listened to our last couple of episodes is we've been education heavy. Again, as we kind of gear up toward going back to school, our minds have been thinking a lot about this. And as you know, here with The Other Side, we try to present the other side of these topics that we cover, right? And whether it's current events, economics, government, education, we try to get outside the idea of what the mainstream thought is on any particular topic. So tonight, what we're going to talk about here is something that I think Mike and I both as educators that have been in the business now for coming up on 10 years. Mike, you've been in a little over 10, is that correct?
I'll be starting number 13 here.
All right. So, you know, obviously we've seen some changes in the classroom, and we've changed ourselves, right? As teachers, we certainly aren't teaching the same ways that we did in our first couple of years. And one of the things that Mike and I both are in agreement on, and one of the things that we've tried to do over the last year or so, is through the ideas of how we use time management throughout the day. And by this, what I'm referring to is how we manage our lessons from class to class. Now, one of the things that they will teach you if you ever go off to become a teacher, if you want to study becoming an educator in college, or once you get into working, certainly you'll probably have an administrator that will beat this in your head, is this concept of teaching what is called bell to bell, right? And obviously this is more prevalent at the high school and middle school levels where you're on a bell schedule. But it's this idea, that essentially once the bell rings to start a class, it's all business from beginning to end. And, obviously you structure the class in a certain way. Sometimes teachers will utilize what are known as bell ringers, where once that bell rings, the students know, okay, I'm going to be journaling for 5 minutes, or there's a question to answer up on the board, or you turn and share something with a partner. It's just some kind of activity to kind of ease into what's going on for that class period. And then, of course, you have the meat of your content, whatever it is, whether it's direct instruction or they're researching online or whatever, and then some kind of work time and then conclusion. And that should be planned out from bell to bell. Well, Mike and I both, for lack of a better way of saying it, reject this idea. We reject this notion that you have to structure a class, when we teach 70-minute class periods from bell to bell. And I want to preface this by saying this is nothing more than a ploy to condition students into the idea that, okay, when you get older and you get into a job or career, you're going to be expected to punch the clock at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you're working all the way up until you leave at 5 o'clock. It's that factory mentality that we've talked about, so prevalent, of school being tied to conditioning students for working in the real world. Well, obviously that is debunked. That's a myth. If you walk into any major retailer, if you walk into any major company today, you're not going to see people diligently working from the moment they punch in on the clock to the time that they leave. And in fact, right, many successful businesses have tinkered with this. One example is Google using what's known as 20% time, where they would give their workers 20% of their work week to do whatever it is that they wanted to do, so long as it related as an investment back to the company. So obviously they couldn't just go and, play a game and waste 20% of their work time, but they could do something that was of interest to them. They could go out and try to develop, something that would help the business, but it may be something completely unrelated to their job description and title. Zappos, for example, is another company that is geared toward more of a freestyle workplace, laid back atmosphere. It's not always nose to the grindstone from beginning to end. So I just want to kind of preface and give the listener a little bit of background on that. And here's where I want to kind of now turn it over to Mike, because both of us have taken this idea on, Mike, but you've got a little bit more tangible story here to talk about this with a class that you actually tried something different with, your AP economics class. So tell the listeners a little bit about what it is that you did, and then what were the results of doing this.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, it wasn't anything like revolutionary. I just, I looked at the 70-minute period and then the information that the kids needed to have in order to be prepared. And when I say prepared, if in advanced placement courses and AP courses, there is a national test administered by the College Board, which comes in the middle of May each year. And so as a teacher, I don't know. I mean, I know which subjects are going to be on the test, but we don't know what questions are going to be on the test. All we can do is prepare our students. And in this case, for me to give them as much macroeconomics information as possible, and hope that when they go in and they sit down and take the test, they're able to perform well on it. And then we get the scores back in early July, and we can see that either we prepared them or we didn't. But yeah, I mean, my first 12 years, I was pretty much conditioned by this bell to bell thing. When I first started, that was my my principal. When I first got here, actually, he was the vice principal when my first year here, and then he became principal. But he was big into that. And so for the 8 years where I worked under him, he was big into the bell to bell. And, I was younger and I wanted to be a good employee and a diligent employee. So I did what he asked. And, I would have these bell ringers and I would structure my lesson to ensure that there was as little downtime as possible. And I would try and go all the way to the end. And what I found over time is that, God, this was really, really difficult to do. It just wasn't practical. The kids weren't having it. I mean, there were virtually no kids who were willing to sit down and do world history for 70 minutes straight back to back, 5 times a week. All that you had were and I'm using quotes here, good students. And I don't mean like, this one is good and that one is bad, but you as a teacher, Justin, you know what I'm saying when I say good students, the ones who don't complain, don't give you any grief. You ask them to do this, they're going to do it. You ask them to do that, they're going to do it. And they're going to do A work. Yeah, those students, they're going to do it no matter what. But they weren't super engaged. They were just kind of robotically going through a process. And really what you ended up with were a ton of behavior problems. So I spent, at least the first decade of my career issuing filler. That's what it becomes when you really don't have enough to, practically do this. You just start coming up with filler. You just start coming up with ideas and it's just busy work and the kids know what it is and they start rejecting it. So, that's just a bit of a background. So what I did in economics this year is I said, you know what, I'm done with that. I'm just not going to do it anymore. I'm going to utilize as much time as I need to teach you what I need to teach you. And there are going to be no more assignments. There is no homework. There's no filler at all. There were no projects. There was nothing. All there was instruction from me. Then I would take questions, we would do examples, and I would give them some reinforcement problems. Okay, we taught this, we worked on it. Let's do another couple. And none of those were for a grade. I took a few of them and I put them in the grade book. I would just go in there and I put 10s all the way through just so it looked like we were doing something. But I didn't take any of them for a grade. It was just a learning atmosphere. And when I broke down how much time I needed to do this, 70 minutes was it was too much. So I made a deal with the kids. I said, look, I'll give you, give me half the period. I'll give you half the period. I said, the first half of the period I teach you. And all I ask back is that you're engaged, that you're actually dialed in. I said, I'm going to take away the assignments. I'm going to take away the homework. I'm going to take away the projects. I'm going to take away all of that. All I'm going to do is instruct you. And all I want you to do is learn it and ask questions when you don't know it. We'll do reinforcement activities. I won't take them for a grade, except for a completion grade here and there. I said, can you make this deal? They said, absolutely. And of course they had questions for me. They said, well, what if we're on our phones? I said, fine, you're on your phones. They said, you're not going to take them away. I said, no. They said, can we watch Netflix? Absolutely. Let's watch Netflix. Justin, we probably busted out an entire season of Parks and Rec during the 3rd trimester of macroeconomics. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I hadn't really ever seen it before. It's kind of funny, but that's what they wanted to watch in the second half of the period. So we watched a bunch of Parks and Rec.
It's awesome.
Long story short, the kids did better on the AP exam this year than any other cohort of AP economics students I've ever had. Statistically, they did better. They performed better, had a higher average score and a higher pass percentage rate than anybody we had had before. A little over 82% of the kids passed that test. Now, nationally, in the social studies, nationwide, you get about 55 to 60% pass rate. In macroeconomics, it was 57% this year. We had 83% of the kids pass it this year. I'd never have a macroeconomics class do that well. And I taught them half the time. I got rid of all the filler, taught them half the time. It was just a non-traditional approach. And I think I've built up enough professional capital here to where I feel like I can do it. And I really want to say kudos to our administration because they leave me alone. I think they're kind of coming from the vein of like, look, we trust him. He's going to teach them. They're not going to goof off. They're going to learn. And I feel comfortable enough with them. And I'm glad they extend that to me to where I feel like I can do that. And the kids enjoyed it. I took a survey of them at the end of the term. And I said, keep it anonymous, man. I don't want to know your name because I want you to answer anonymously, but I want you to answer honestly. I said, did you feel prepared? Did you feel like it was a waste of time? What did you think of it? And across the board, there were a couple of them who said, hey, I wish we would have practice multiple choice questions a little bit more. We did a lot of free response questions, and that was actually very useful to me. I said, oh, okay, great. I'm reading through these. I have to remember to, stay on the multiple choice because half the test is multiple choice. But they said it was so much better. They learned, they weren't bogged down. They didn't feel stressed. They just enjoyed it. And that's what a lot of people said. They actually enjoyed the class. And you don't get that term used a whole lot in school these days. So I was very proud of that. Not just, the fact that we did well, and it's something that I can hang my hat on. It's the fact that the kids actually had fun. That's what I've been looking for after 13 years of educating. And not having fun like, hey, we're going to have a party every day. Like having fun, and the kids clearly learned something. I have the data to demonstrate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's an important thing that you said there at the end too, is because, when kids are in these classes, and clearly, AP is a decision on their part, whether, there's pressure from home or a counselor or something, hey, maybe you ought to take it. They're still making a conscious decision to say, okay, sign me up for it. They're there from that perspective. You want them to enjoy what they're learning, whether they go on to study something in the economic field or not. There's so much that they're learning from, that. And even more so when they're experiencing something like they did in your class, where, you're showing them that they can get results by putting in max effort in short periods of time, without having to say, okay, you're going to have X number of hours or days or weeks to put in on this. And, by God, we've got to completely fill it up no matter what with that. That's treacherous. I mean, I am obviously a non-traditional teacher, and I can tell you, from the jobs that I had prior to coming into education, there is no boss out there that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's probably some examples out there that would buck this example, that would look at results that you got from doing something, and the first thing they would say is, well, that's fantastic product. You created this project, you solved this problem, but there's only one issue here. I budgeted in 100 hours and you got it done in 50. I'm going to need you to work 50 more hours on this. I mean, that just is ridiculous. Nobody would ever say that, right? So the whole idea that you were able to get these results by doing it that way, I think, speaks volumes about teaching them that idea that if you give max effort and you focus and you concentrate, not only can you have fun with it, but you can get those results without having to conform to this idea that, okay, well, we're in here for 70 minutes a day for 13 weeks. We've got to fill up every single second with some kind of activity, because I can't have the principal walk into my room and see you guys not completely engaged in what it is that we're doing.
Which is fake engagement. It's, yeah, like you said, it's a facade. It's just fake engagement anyway.
Yeah, they know how to play the game.
But the other thing is, one of the things that I found out is that this took max effort from me too. This was actually, look, you're a teacher, I'm a teacher. I feel like we can probably be honest here. There are days where we can structure a lesson where it is heavy student work. It's like, it's heavy student directed. And that's one of the ones where it's like, hey, if we have to prep, or if we have to get some grading done, or, if you're just not feeling it that day, it's one of those where you can just kind of push it over to the students. But under this kind of contract that I had with them, I wasn't able to do that. In other classes, I was able to do that. And this one, I wasn't able to do that because I made a compact with them, and I had to present every single day, and I had to give my best. But and the great thing was that the kids bought in. I had a great group of kids, but with buy-in from both sides, you're right. I mean, we accomplished what we wanted to accomplish, and this arbitrary time period was rendered meaningless. I mean, completely meaningless. And you and I have been talking about that for a while.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up too there, about that, because, while I haven't necessarily taken that strategy or that approach, I've done something similar. And that is, as I've gotten to work more with seniors, mostly. Now, this coming year is going to be a little bit of a challenge for me, because I'm going to have more underclassmen this year than I've had since my time arriving at the school that I was in. I was at the high school for a while, and then I went middle school. Now I'm back in high school. So it's been a little bit of adjustment from that perspective, but I've mostly had seniors. I have taken on the attitude and approach, and maybe some of this is shaped by my worldview as to what I went through. Because when I was a senior in high school, I had to bust my tail to complete my senior year the way that I needed to get into college. I was admitted to school on academic probation, so there was no messing around. I was doubled up in some math and English language arts and things of that nature to get what I needed to do done. So my senior year was nose to the grindstone, serious business. It wasn't TAing, taking advanced weights, and all these other fluff classes. I was working my tail off. But one of the things that I've tried to do with my students is to get them to understand that independent nature that they're going to be facing, no matter what they do, no matter if they go off to a traditional four-year college, two-year community college, living at home, living at the dorm, going off into the workforce, there's going to be a flood of independence coming their way, unlike what they've ever experienced, because up to this point, their entire education has been guided by this tight structured schedule that they've had. And they've always had somebody there holding their hand, standing over their shoulder, telling them to get to work, taking away the distractions, basically being the enforcer. And that's all pretty much going to go away. Not completely, but pretty much. At least the level of freedom and autonomy that they're going to have, they've known nothing like before. And so I think we almost do them a disservice, Mike, when we as teachers of seniors continue that on into their senior year. So one of the things that I've tried to do is give a more hands-off approach to the kids. And at first, I think they kind of take it as like, oh, he's a pushover, or he's just going to let us get away with whatever we want to do. And that's not necessarily the case. I think if you were hopefully to ask some of my former students, they would say, no, there's structure. There's definitely structure, high expectations, there's rigor, all those buzzwords that we like to use in education. But the thing that I've done is I've allowed the students the autonomy to say, like, okay, here, and I don't do a lot of direct instruction. I don't lecture a lot. I mean, I may have some periods of time where I lecture a little bit more than others, but oftentimes it might be an independent reading. It might be research. There might be some other resource that I have secured for them to learn the content. And then there's always some kind of application, whether it's, written reflections, projects, research-based things, whatever it might be. And I give large chunks of time to complete these tasks. And I always tell them, almost daily, at least early on, I think they kind of get the picture after the first couple of weeks, that it's incumbent upon them to use their time wisely. Right now, if somebody is disrupting somebody else, of course, I address that. But if somebody decides that they want to work on math because they didn't get their math homework done, or they've got a senior English paper that they need to write, and they choose to use the time to do that, that's fine. But there's going to be consequences to that. The kids have to understand the natural consequences of making choices. Heck, we preach this in economics, right? Right out of the get-go. We talk about choices and how there's scarcity and there's not an unlimited amount of time. And if you choose to go do this, then you're giving up that. And, there's consequences and trade-offs to that. So I think we do the kids a major disservice when we stand over their shoulder, when we tell them to put the phone away, when we tell them to get off of doing that, when we tell them to put that work away, whatever it might be. If they want to choose to do that, they have to understand, I'm going to allow you the opportunity to make that decision, but you have to understand too that there are natural consequences to that. That if you don't get work turned in on time, you're not going to receive full credit for it. And the kids quickly see that if they're a day or two late on an assignment and they only get half credit for it, that's a huge hit. And they see that how much harder it is to bring the grade up a little bit later on. But we just coddle them so much throughout their entire time in school up to that point that it's a shock to the system when somebody says, I'm going to start to treat you like an adult, because here in a matter of months, weeks, days, you're going to be entering into a world of freedom, for lack of a better term, more or less, that you've not had before. And so I have found that usually by the time we get more toward the second and third trimester, and obviously then the later, the second half of those trimesters, the kids really start to catch on. And what I find that they oftentimes do is like what you say, they'll give me max effort for the first, 25, 30 minutes of class, and they can oftentimes get done what they need to get done in that period of time, and then they can work on whatever it is that they need to do. So I've really tried to use that in my classroom as well, and I think the kids really appreciate that because it gives them a little bit of a sense of feel like I have some ownership over this. I'm not being forced into having to do it the way that I have been maybe in prior years.
No, absolutely. And I know your lessons pretty well because we work together. There is a ton of thought put into the lessons that you create, and the resources that you use, and then the assessments that you give. And a lot of the assessments that you give are written responses, which is, and you do way more of this than I do. I cheat. I take the easy way out, but you do written responses like in personal reflections, and you ask the kids to analyze and then, tell it back to you. You read every single one of them and then give them feedback on them. So my point here is that these are very thorough lessons, and what the kids have to figure out is that this isn't like, you'll give them, the instructions or the information or whatever, and then you might say, okay, you have until X time to get this done. I think what a lot of the kids think is, here's another fluff, high school assignment that I can actually get done in 5 minutes, and I just have to scribble something down. No, your assignments are like that. And you're right. What you're teaching them is opportunity cost. If you decide to go on YouTube for the next 50 minutes, there is going to be a consequence. You can, and you do allow them that, and you're not going to stand over their shoulder. But at the end of the day, guess what? What they try and do in the final 5 minutes is not going to be anywhere near satisfactory to the standards because they are rigorous, right? And there are high expectations. And it does take them a while to figure that out.
It does. It really does. Like I said, because their hands have been held so much, and I get it. I mean, I've gone back and forth on this. Like I said, I'll have a little bit more underclassmen, freshman, sophomore classes this year. So I will have to, be a little bit more stern with them because you can't give a 15-year-old the same latitude that you can an 18-year-old. There's just not that development to recognize quickly enough, okay, I need to do this. So there needs to be a little bit more rearing with that kind of a student. And I get that. But the thing too there with that is my main goal, whether it's economics, government, world history, geography, whatever it is that I'm teaching, is I want the students to think about what they're learning. Yes, I do have some worksheet-based assignments. I hardly ever use the textbook. So anything that I've created or found online, I usually modify down. I try to get away from, the multiple choice, fill in the blank type things, because I do want the kids actively thinking about, okay, what did I just read? What did I just watch? What did we just talk about? That way I get a sense, I think, as accurate as possible as to where that student is with understanding the content. And then if I feel like as a class, whoa, we missed the boat on this, we need to go back and talk about it again. Or, hey, 80% of the class nailed it. Okay, this 20% over here, I can go and work with them a little bit more one-on-one while the rest of the class is moving on to the next item, as opposed to just saying, okay, we're done, we're moving on to the next thing here. Everybody's completed the checklist, let's move on. So is it perfect? No, no system is perfect. But I do feel like, and I think, based off of what Mike was saying, that both of these options that we've employed in the classroom have gotten better results, not only for us as teachers, but for the students. I think that can't be lost in the equation is that we have to take into account, what are the students thinking about this? How do they feel about it? You know, we certainly know that they're compulsed to be there, but we want them to enjoy it. We want them to walk out saying, hey, you know, I want to come back again tomorrow and see what it is that we're going to do. Or, hey, that was fun. I know we do some module-based things, hands-on activities in econ that always get the kids excited. You know, when we do the more the merrier,
Right.
and some of those, you know, exchange type things, they really enjoy that stuff, and it kind of hooks them into otherwise what would be, you know, seen as kind of a bland subject there. So that's going to wrap it up for our WCVL audience. If you're listening on 92.1 1550 or WCVLAM.com, we appreciate you tuning in and supporting us on the network over there. For those of you that are listening to the podcast on demand or on YouTube, we will carry over with our traditional bonus time here in just a moment, but you have listened to The Other Side. Okay, Mike, I really appreciate you sharing that, man. I think that is a phenomenal story that in this day and age, I think a lot of people would not have the courage to do something like that. And I don't necessarily mean because it's something different and it would, like you said, it was harder work on you to have to do some of that stuff, but they just don't want the headache of having to deal with, gosh, what if my administrator walks in and sees us not fully, what appears to be fully engaged in a lesson, or, you know, even worse, gosh, what if I do this and it's a colossal failure and like only 2 people pass the test? Tell us a little bit about, you know, what was it that kind of pushed you into saying, okay, that's it, I'm giving this a try?
Well, you may remember at the very beginning of 3rd trimester, excuse me, we had ISTEP testing. And so all of the classes for kind of like 4 of the first 5 days of the trimester were 40-minute classes because they had to squeeze in 2 hours of testing at the beginning of the day. And then they actually ran the school day from 10:20 to 3. And so each of the classes was 40 minutes. And it flowed so well. First of all, the kids came in at 10 rather than 8 because I had them first period. So they weren't total zombies yet. They came in at 10. They were refreshed, energized, and I had just the amount of time that I needed to teach them, and I didn't have to worry about filler. This was the first time in 12 years where I didn't have to sit down and say, what can I do to kill 20 more minutes? Because I know that this lesson isn't going to take 70 minutes. And that's what I've been doing for the first 12 years of my teaching. What can I do in case my administrator walks in or walks by? What can I do to make it look like the kids are really, you know, down and engaged? And that's not to say that they're never engaged. It's just that they're not always engaged for 70 minutes at a time, 5 days a week. That's just impractical. You know, we teach this world geography course, and Justin, you probably know, there aren't, so what is it? There aren't 350 minutes a week of geography that's relevant, interesting stuff that we can give them. And with these younger kids, yeah, we really do have to stretch it. You can't really give them the latitude that we give the seniors. But what does it end up being? It just ends up being filler, you know, and that's, you know, that's where it becomes kind of a headache. So anyway, we did these 40-minute periods, and it just worked perfect. I got them the information, we reinforced it, and then they were done. And so at the end of that ISTEP testing, at the end of that first week, I said, all right, guys, do you want to do this? And, you know, they were all in. They said, yeah. And I did think about, okay, what am I going to say if administrator walks in, you know, second half of the class and half the classes, they're on their phones, shopping on Amazon, and then the other ones are watching Parks and Rec up on the big board. Well, I'm going to say, hey, we'll pause the show. Go ahead and ask any student here, and I don't care which one it is, what you learned today, and have them show you. And I trusted the kids enough because of the compact that we made. I trusted the kids enough that they would be able to, and I trusted enough in my own teaching that they would be able to repeat to, you know, to anybody who came in. Here was today's objective. Here is what we did. Here is how I can show what I've learned. And I, you know, so I was pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah, and just to be clear too, and I want to preface this by saying this is absolutely not a backhanded compliment in any way at all. You know, this group that you had, while a very solid group, wasn't an off the charts, like you just knew no matter what you did, this was going to be a slam dunk high pass rate. I mean, I know you and I had conversations where, you know, you say, I'm not quite sure how this is going to pan out. I don't know what my percentage rate is going to be. Only time will tell. And
Yeah.
again, that's not in any way, shape, or form meant to disparage that group of kids.
No,
that
no, no, no.
At
It
all.
wasn't. But the top of the class was very strong. Actually, the top of the class was uniquely strong.
Mhm.
I did see that. The high achievers were, but that's not where the gains were seen. So, for instance, the highest score that you can get on the AP exam is a 5. You can't get higher than that. And so, like I said, the top part of this class was phenomenally strong. We had 5 kids in the class get a 5. We also had 5 kids in last year's class get a 5. So I didn't see differences in the top. Where the differences came, and this is one of the things that made me happiest, is that second and third tier of students behind all of those scores were the ones that got pushed up. And so you saw this group of kids that I think probably might fall through the cracks in some other traditional learning environments where they're just bored. They were the ones who were able to buy in and I think get something out of this, where in the past, the way that I've taught it, those kids did not.
Yeah, that's a great point there. Well, I wanted to transition into this last couple minutes here that we've got. We'll go about 10 more minutes here, and talk a little bit about something that you and I had a quick conversation with at the end of our last podcast, as we were kind of debriefing of what we had gone through. And one of the things that you and I have talked about repeatedly, and it came up again last week, was this idea of, you know, I mentioned the kids, seniors, you know, moving on to college, 4-year, 2-year, associates, bachelor, maybe dreams of, you know, master's or PhD work, or even just going into the workforce, giving these guys a sense of direction. You know, I think that one of the things that we oftentimes hear, at least, you know, lip service paid to, as it relates to the role of us as high school, especially as senior-led teachers, is, you know, we're preparing them for, you know, what's going to come in these, you know, next 6 months, year, and so on. And so I think, you know, obviously the guidance counselors have a huge role in playing with that. Parents obviously are another part of the equation. But as it relates to direction, right? You know, what is it that students are looking at doing? You know, you and I have said that it just seems like, and it feels like, so many kids are being, for lack of a better word, forced or pressured into making a decision to get some kind of higher education. Again, we have a strong community college here in Indiana known as Ivy Tech. I know a lot of students who aren't the strongest students in high school, yet, you know, they might have some desire to want to get, you know, technical training beyond what they got in their high school classes to prepare them for whether, you know, be like a nurse or, you know, some kind of skilled craft or something like that. Will go off and do something like that. But we also get a lot of kids that, you know, do end up going to Indiana State, Purdue, Ball State, what have you. And let's just be honest, I don't want to say these kids don't have any business being there, but they are woefully unprepared. They're woefully unexcited about being there. They're going through the motions. They're there because mom and dad have laid down the dictum that you will get a college degree. There's an expectation that they be there, and they don't want to be there. And we see this by analyzing the numbers of, you know, dropouts, kids that go and then unenroll within the first year or two, or just academically can't make it. You know, they just don't have the fortitude and aptitude to be able to make it through what's going on there. We see it reflected in what kids are majoring in. They have no clue, right? I know you brought this point up last week in talking about some of the different majors that you see out there, these kind of social justice geared majors that you'll find out there today. And kids aren't walking away with any kind of skill that will make them employable. And then they get angry. They're in mass massive amounts of debt. They're struggling to find a job. Talk to us a little bit about what you've seen. You know, we talked about the evolution of us being in education over this decade or so, and how you've seen any changes related to that, and any thoughts that you have on that.
Well, I saw some numbers a few years ago. A friend of mine, well, you know him too, Matt Newkirk, had showed them to me. It was alarming, but it was the level of remediation required for high school graduates in their first year at four-year universities. It was like it was some. I don't. I'm not even going to try and give the number, but I can say with certainty it was over half of students, at least from our area. I don't know if it was our school or maybe our county, needed to get remediated in basic math and basic English when they were getting to these schools like Indiana State or Ball State or IU or Purdue, because they weren't ready yet. So yeah, there's just kind of this mentality out there of getting ushered in, and that's the next step. And kind of like you had been talking about earlier, you got thinking outside the box is just not something that occurs. The workforce is different. It's about problem solving. It's not as linear as it used to be. And one of the things that I don't think kids even consider is, what if I got a job, saved up some money, and traveled, or you know, not like traveled for leisure, not like traveled for Europe, but go to another state and see what it's like. Like, can I make it on my own? You know, I did this at 29, but I think I would have been able to do it earlier. I just packed up my car. You know, I had a friend who lived in Indiana, but I was in San Diego. I just put everything that I could put into my car. I put it in there, and then I drove out to Indiana, and I had a little bit of savings, and I was fortunate enough to be able to make it. I first went to a grocery store. I worked in a grocery store for a number of months. Then I got an interview at North Montgomery, and I was able to get that job. But I think there's some value in that nobody will ever tell these kids that there's some value in that. You know, why don't you just drive to Arkansas and see if you like it, and try and get a job, and then try and meet some people. Maybe you'll meet some people you like. Maybe you'll hate it and you can come back home. But you know what I mean? I mean, this is, I think that when I think of like looking at non-traditional routes or something that I would like my kids to do, I'm gonna really encourage them to do that. Now, look, if my kid is a 4.0 student, I'm not disparaging my kid though, but I was pretty firmly in the 2s, so I'd be surprised if he got into the 4s. But if he was a 4.0 student and he knew that he wanted to be a doctor and had that very defined path in front of him, well, then it's like, okay, go ahead and take the path. You know what you're going to do. But if he's anything like I was, where it was just like, I'm no clue. I was 18. I was totally clueless. I'm going to encourage, don't go off to college. Well, what's the rush? Let's go let's learn the real world a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that there's this kind of false sense of hope that's sold to kids about what college equates to. I mean, that was even, I think you were kind of alluding to there, that was even sold to us. I know when I graduated from Butler University in 2001, I mean, the whole time that I was there, Harvard of the Midwest, these employers are going to be, just drooling over your resume because it's going to say Butler University, and the alumni network will be able to gear you and equip you and network you with all of these people. And I was sadly disappointed when I started to go out and apply, because all I was hearing employers wanting at the time was 2 to 5 years of experience. Every single entry-level job that I applied for at that time was geared toward, we want 2 to 5 years of previous experience. I'm going, this is an entry-level position. How am I supposed to have had 2 to 5 years of experience? But I had been spending that time in a classroom, whereas somebody who, as you said, maybe they didn't start in the job that I was looking at, but they had been working for the company, whether it was on the floor or, doing some kind of behind-the-scenes work, grunt work or something, and now they had worked their way up. Those were the people that were getting those jobs with the real skills, because they didn't require as much training as somebody who was coming fresh out of college would. So, commission only jobs, they were a dime a dozen, but anything related to advertising, sales, marketing, things that I was looking for was almost virtually impossible to touch. And I too ended up in a retail environment, working the first couple of, at least the first year in retail, grocery sales, and then finally getting into some advertising sales. But yeah, I mean, I was just kind of sold this idea that, you're going to have this, 40,000 a year entry level salary, company car, company cell phone, expense account, all this, that, and the other. And it was just, and I'm not saying that guys didn't get that, but I don't think that that's, I think kids kind of get that sold in their mind that if I go off and spend 4 to 6 years of my life sitting in a classroom learning stuff, that I'm automatically going to be successful. And I know there's all kinds of statistics that talk about the average lifetime earnings of a college degree holder versus not. But I think increasingly, because more and more kids are being led down that path, and enrollment numbers are up across the board in universities, that's making them more competitive, but it's also watering down what it means to have a college degree, because for lack of a better term, they're a dime a dozen now. You can grab somebody with a bachelor's degree from just about anywhere and plug them in, and those that aren't are missing the opportunity to go off and work in a real world work experience, gain some knowledge on the job, get in an apprenticeship program. You and I have talked before about how there's no shame in taking a blue collar job where you're working for a living, manual labor. Those jobs are so needed. I mean, we clearly live in a service economy. If anything happened to any of my appliances, my car, my home, I would absolutely be at the mercy of somebody who knew what they were doing. And I should be, because they have learned those skills and they should be compensated for that. And so at any rate, I just thought that was kind of an interesting tie-in to kind of talk a little bit about the structure of what school is doing, coupled along with this idea of, really forcing as many students as possible off into college classrooms, when clearly there's way too many going, when they should be looking at, like you said, traveling, working, any number of other options besides being miserable in a college classroom.
Oh yeah, you were right when you said the dropout rates. It's just the dropout, and then the debt, and that's another thing. Like the lack of debt counseling. I mean, this is just mind-boggling to me when you look at how much student debt has been accumulated. We're well over $1 trillion now, and if you look at the default rates for these kids, and now you have these politicians telling the kids, well, it's not their fault, and the government should be paying off this debt. Well, I can tell you this, as a taxpayer, if somebody goes and gets a master's degree in militant feminist theory, I don't want to pay for it, and I don't think that I should have to pay for it. And that person should expect to probably be in debt for the rest of their life, unless they're a very good orator or a phenomenal writer. But there's going to be no market demand for that skill, and I use that term very loosely. So, and I think that's what you get with a lot of the kids. They're going off and they're doing something that makes them feel good or makes them, keeps them interested. But there's just nothing applicable about it.
No, absolutely. That's absolutely the best way to say it. So, yeah, that's a good conversation. I think there's a lot of timeliness to what we were talking about here. And as you kind of think a little bit about, what your expectations are, whether you're a parent listening to this, of your kids being in the classroom, when you think about what it is that your kids are doing on a daily basis in and out of the classroom, or just bigger overarching picture of, if you're getting toward those final years of high school and college, are you forcing your kid off to the right options, or are you, kind of creating that pressure of putting them into an environment where they just don't want to be there. They would rather be doing something else. And you know what? Maybe at age 20 or 21, they'll be ready for it. And there's no shame in that at all. So yeah, I mean, just keeping those options open, and based off of what we've seen, in the classroom and from students, I think we need to be a little bit more flexible and understanding of what our students' needs are as they transition from high school into post-secondary school. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Mike, I appreciate your contributions as always. Some great conversation there. And again, kudos to you for the results that you got on the AP economics test.
I didn't do it, not me.
Well, no, yeah, absolutely. Students did. But hey, under your tutelage, right?
I'll take that.
All right. Well, again, thank you for listening to this episode of The Other Side. Again, if you're looking to make contact with us, all of that contact information that I gave at the beginning of the show is available on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. You can find all of our archived episodes on there as well. I encourage you to give us a subscribe on YouTube, a like, or comment to us if you have any questions. But thank you to listening to The Other Side.
Thanks for listening. And remember, you're not fully informed until you've heard the other side.